All right, we are back with some big news out of the Florida State ACC case in North Carolina. We've got Doug Rohan of Rohan Law with us today. Just before we get started, I do want to send out a special shout out, thoughts and prayers to all of our Tallahassee family, all of our family up there in the Panhandle in that area, the storms that came through. I saw some pretty devastating photos. Just thoughts and prayers with you guys. If you're not familiar with everything that's gone on there in Tallahassee, maybe just search Twitter, search social media. Pretty crazy stuff. Hopefully you guys are staying safe. Maybe if you watch this video, it'll provide you a good 15, 20 minute, break from thinking about it, but hope everybody's staying safe and follow local ordinances, all those things, but thoughts and prayers with you guys there for sure. Doug, thanks for joining me. Thanks for jumping on really quick. Some big news out of North Carolina today. I'll let you kind of break it and we'll go from there.
Yeah, I was expecting Judge Bledsoe to issue his order yesterday on Thursday, which is pretty typical for him to not go into the Friday news dump. But here we are Friday morning, and he did publish his order regarding Florida State's request to temporarily stay all of the proceedings while they are appealing Judge Bledsoe's issue on the jurisdiction and subjecting Florida State to litigation in North Carolina to the North Carolina Supreme Court. So the judge agreed. The judge admitted that basically it's an operation of law. As soon as a proper appeal is filed, that case loses its jurisdiction in the business court and automatically becomes basically the property of the North Carolina Supreme Court. So the law does allow for some additional matters to be heard, a hearing like what took place here. So if there are any administrative items that needed to be taken care of, or alternatively, if there's anything that helps the appellate process at the Supreme Court of North Carolina, those matters can still come before Judge Bledsoe. But otherwise, there's a bucket of cold water splashed on both parties. Basically, everything grinds to a halt, and now we wait for the North Carolina Supreme Court to determine whether or not Judge Bledsoe is correct, and Florida State has waived sovereign immunity and is subject to being sued in North Carolina.
So is there any kind of a time frame for that?
We're talking months and not weeks. I mean, even in an expedited fashion, if for some reason they had, and I don't know the procedural rules for North Carolina and how it works, but in general, the first thing that has to happen is the entire transcript from that first hearing has to be prepared. That becomes part of the record. That gets sent up to the Supreme Court. Both parties write briefs, lengthy briefs about their opinions, citing to that transcript. So just getting the administrative stuff prepared for the Supreme Court is probably going to take at least 30 days for that to happen. Then the Supreme Court has to work a hearing into their schedule, which is even busier than Judge Bledsoe and the Superior Court. So I would suspect, if I had to guess, again, I missed on guessing when Judge Bledsoe would issue his order by a day, but I would think we're talking probably early August before we have a hearing in the North Carolina Supreme Court. Maybe we're surprised. Maybe they put it on a 60-day calendar sometime in July instead. But even then, once the hearing happens, it still takes several weeks for an order to be issued. So again, I've said before, I don't expect anything practically to happen either in the case or in terms of settlement before mid-August. Mid-August is the date, August 15th is the date I would circle to start paying attention to what maybe is going to happen if you just want to know what is the resolution.
So Florida State got dealt somewhat of a setback having to refile in Tallahassee. Does this put them kind of on even terms, even playing? Like, are these equal setbacks? I don't know if setback's the right word or not. Or is one a little does this even move like the Tallahassee thing forward a little faster? Not necessarily move that case faster.
Right.
Are we closer to a resolution in the Tallahassee case in theory than in the North Carolina one?
In theory, but I have some bad news there. So first, going back to our conversation before this order was issued, it was really win-win for Florida State. Either everything gets stopped in North Carolina and we are just in a pause, or Judge Bledsoe moved forward with discovery. Either way, Florida State was getting something positive out of that decision. It is true that this allows the Florida case and Judge Cooper to now catch back up. But again, that case is also starting from scratch. And it's very likely the ACC will appeal any decision about the ACC being subject to the jurisdiction of the Florida court. So what you're seeing in North Carolina is very likely to come down the pipeline in Florida as well. Now, the Florida appeal will go to the Court of Appeals in Florida. That will be a little bit faster. I do know that they have an expedited time frame for briefs and hearings and that aspect. So this does give Florida a chance to get a little bit caught back up with North Carolina. I still don't think we're going to get any true, valuable, significant orders out of either court before the parties start talking about settlement in serious terms by August.
So you had talked about this prior as being a win-win either way for Florida State. When we texted last week, and I did a quick video on just some things that were going on in Tallahassee and in the North Carolina case, talked about Clemson. I talked about that as well, how it was likely going to be a win-win. You still feel like that? Do you think this is the way, like if you could have picked one way or the other, is this the way you would have wanted it to go, or would you rather seen it go the other way? Like, did we get the bigger win, maybe is the good question?
I don't know that my opinion on that really matters too much. It's kind of like, wanting a team to wanting your rivals. We were talking off air about Florida or Miami, wanting one of those teams to win the first game. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day. I've said from the beginning pretty consistently that the calendar was the biggest ally of Florida State and Clemson in terms of reaching a settlement, as opposed to anything procedural that's happening in these cases. So whether the cases come to a complete stop or start moving into the discovery phase, I don't think either party really is scared of discovery. I think it will be more uncomfortable for the ACC than Florida State, but they wouldn't have gone down this process if they were truly scared to begin with. So both parties are prepared for discovery. Both parties are ready to go through depositions and disclosing documents. I just think that the calendar and the ESPN deadline of February 2025 is the biggest impetus to getting the parties to a settlement table.
When we look at the two cases, we talked a lot about North Carolina. Where are we in the timeline for things to be refiled and re-answered and kind of get picked back up in Florida?
So on Wednesday, we just got the order from Judge Cooper from the April 9th hearing. So it took almost a month for that order to be researched, prepared, issued, signed, and filed, and then released to the public. I don't think his second hearing order will take 30 days because that's a much more simple conclusion. Florida State needs to refile a second amended complaint. I would like to see that order come out next week. I think that's reasonable for there to be such a short delay between his first and second orders. Whenever that order comes out, Florida State has 7 business days, not counting weekends, to file their second amended complaint. So I know they've been working on it this whole time, which lends credence to the idea that it's going to be a pretty significant overhaul, not just a correction of the jurisdictional paragraph. And then after that, the ACC has 20 days to respond. So if we're looking at May 15th, for that order to come out, we have a second amended complaint by May 21st. We have an answer mid-June by the ACC. Then we schedule, I'm sure, another hearing to hear any motions to dismiss or anything that is filed by the ACC. Again, probably in July, August. Maybe at that point we're pushing into September for the next hearing in Florida.
That hearing happens. We get a ruling. Either way, an appeal's coming from one of the two sides, right? If the judge sides with Florida State, the ACC likely going to appeal. Mm-hmm. And that's the point we essentially are with the North Carolina case. Again, it's gone to the Supreme Court. In Florida, you said it would go to an appellate court as opposed Correct. To going to the Florida State Supreme Court. Little quicker process, again, just to quickly recap.
Look, the billable hour is undefeated. and that's where, again, Florida State has an advantage over the ACC because Florida State is handling 2 lawsuits and the ACC is handling 4, with the potential for a 5th to come along anytime with North Carolina. So uh, we could find ourselves, one version of the future events is that we are at September 26th in Florida, and we're at the exact same point that the North Carolina suit is today.
Yeah. What and I know you have not dove into this case as certainly as much as you have with Florida State, but we're going to see all of these same steps. Maybe not the refile, right, with Clemson, but we're going to see most of these same steps in their lawsuits as well, I would assume.
Look, I know you've got some Clemson followers, and let me just restate how disappointed I am that some attorney that has Clemson ties hasn't stood up and started handling the analysis of the Clemson case. I really need somebody to do that because I don't have the time to dig into
We'll
my
take you.
elbows
Yeah.
on that. But look, school's about to be out and it's about to be summertime. If another 30 days go by and nobody's stepped up, then maybe I'll just have to get into it. But to your point, one thing that is going to speed things up a little bit in South Carolina is this whole issue of the sunshine laws. They've already ordered that the ESPN agreement be made available, something that hasn't happened in either North Carolina or Florida. So Clemson's case is practically speaking pulling ahead of the other 2 cases, even though they were filed 60 days later. We'll see what happens. Their mediation date, I think, wasn't scheduled until October 25th, if I remember correctly. But they're between the 3 different states, it appears that the South Carolina case is in a more advanced position to start getting to the discovery process early. And again, we just want the ACC to go through discovery. We don't care whether it's in an FSU case or a Clemson case, because that's where the discomfort will start ramping up. So, we're glad Clemson is here, and it's probably going to be the South Carolina Clemson case that pushes the parties into that settlement on that August, September timeframe.
I want to ask you about a potential settlement here in a moment, but first you mentioned the ACC ESPN agreement. I'm going to ask you to speculate here, which I know there's a attorney, you can or can't do it in court, but you can certainly on this show if you'd like. Do you think that eventually a Florida judge will rule the same way and get that document accessed by Florida State attorneys?
I do. The only hurdle that has slowed the process is that the Florida State attorneys can't agree. ESPN already said in the North Carolina hearing when we were there in Mecklenburg the first time that they were prepared to provide an unredacted copy to the parties and then just have a redacted copy available to the public. Florida State's attorneys cannot agree with those terms. So we need a judge to order that to happen, and Judge Cooper is waiting for us to get to that point in the process of litigation to make that order. Of course, the North Carolina judge, could go ahead. He did rule in part. I didn't get too into the weeds on that decision, but I think practically speaking, Judge Bledsoe hasn't really addressed the ESPN agreement yet either. Maybe that's an order that's coming here in the near term regarding the disclosure of that to the parties. But the Florida State attorneys simply can't agree to a partial disclosure, and that's why they're waiting for one of the 2 judges to issue an order for the same.
So talking about a settlement, again, this is maybe tough to guess on, but in your opinion or kind of the way you view things, do you think that the ACC is likely, if and when all 3 parties kind of get closer and closer to a settlement, do you think those are 2 very separate conversations, or do you think that there's kind of a collaboration of like, man, whatever we let Florida State go for, we're probably letting Clemson go for? And then to follow that up, I've seen people talk about like, can you with sunshine laws and Florida State being a public entity, can you put a non-disclosure on a settlement, like, or would that number have to be known? Can you put a gag order on that? Like, can Florida State even agree to that? So kind of a 2-part question there.
Yeah, I mean, first, yes, a settlement is likely to happen, and it will likely involve all 3 in concert talking, because I agree with you. Whatever is good in one deal is likely going to be good in the other deal. And you're right. We've talked about this, in your early shows when we were first getting into the sunshine laws. I don't think there is the feasibility of having any type of NDA. It has to be made public. We always knew how much Bobby Bowden was making in his contracts and the other, major college coaches. It's a function of the laws of the state of Florida. Now, if the legislature goes in the next legislative session and makes some alterations to that law, then perhaps there can be some changes in the future. The laws can always change, but as they stand right now, no, there's no mechanism for the parties to agree to an NDA regarding the settlement terms.
Doug, anything else major or anything else you want to point out from today's news or anything just in general on where we are with any of these court cases?
Not specifically the court cases. I think that, there has been some discussion on Twitter, and of course, please follow me along there for additional analysis and additional reports. But what's becoming evident and clear is I do still believe that this will resolve. I still believe it will resolve after August 15th. I do believe we'll play a 2025 season in the ACC. And then after that, there's a question of, whether we'll be in the SEC or Big Ten. And I think that the Big Ten players are obviously talking and interested. I think the question is, how bad does the SEC want to protect its turf, protect Florida State from becoming a Fox property? There's one scenario where ESPN is the fourth member of those negotiations. Maybe they come up with some agreement that says we will go ahead and extend the grant of rights or the media partnership with the ACC, knowing and assenting to Clemson and Florida State entering into the SEC portfolio. And then that way, yes, the number is still low from a competitive standpoint, but you've got two fewer pieces of the pie that are taking those shares of the existing ESPN ACC agreement. So I could see that being one possible plausible scenario. So ESPN gets their ACC games. The ACC continues to get money. The amount of the exit fee is so high that nobody else can afford it besides Clemson and Florida State. So those are the things that would be curious to see if that's one possible resolution.
You mentioned your Twitter account. Where can folks follow you specifically, and tell us a little bit more about Rohan Law?
Yeah, Rohan Law PC on X or Twitter. We're very active there with any developments that come out. Happy to interact and answer questions as you come up with them. And of course, as we mentioned before, my firm is based out of Atlanta, Georgia. So if you find yourself in trouble, we want to be your best friends on your worst day, whether it's being arrested or charged with a crime or being hurt at work. I've got 20 years of experience, and the firm's been in existence for 11 years now. And so we're very excited to come alongside any Seminoles that might need some help. And hopefully you don't need me. In the meantime, if you want to meet me on a social basis, we are starting to put together an Atlanta Twitter meetup. I'll announce it here with you guys as well, June 29th at Scofflaw Brewery on a Saturday at 5 o'clock. We'll be out there with some other Seminoles that are going to be there. That's the home of the Atlanta Seminole Club. So come check us out and come hang out for a little bit. We're going to talk about the litigation. We're also going to talk about some plans that we have in store for our trip to Ireland. So if you're going to make the Ireland trip, please especially make the effort to be out there so that we can talk about some strategery that we're going to be working on for some friends and fans out there.
Awesome. I saw that date on Twitter and I was like, wonder if I can get away with a road trip that Saturday or not. So, Doug, I appreciate you a ton for joining us. We all oftentimes get comments and questions. If you have comments and questions that maybe we missed something, feel free to shoot them below. Sometimes Doug will answer them on here. Sometimes we'll answer them in a future video. And if you've missed any of our coverage, all of these videos are in a playlist. I'll link that right here at the end of the video. You can click it and get caught up if you've got, I don't know, at this point, like 9 or 10 hours to kill. That we've done a lot on this. So you can certainly binge some of the content, maybe put it on a 1.5 speed or something to kind of blow through some of it. But again, thank you, Doug, for joining us. I appreciate it, and we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, man. Go Noles.
Go Noles.